So I've enjoyed this game in many honest ways. I've used every starting deck, including the secret starting deck, but now I'm an adult and have no time for honesty and fun. So today, we are going to embrace the dark side and are going to use all the forbidden techniques available to us to absolutely destroy this game as fast as we possibly can. So get ready for a bunch of broken stuff, because this is the fastest way to beat Yugioh. So for this playthrough challenge, with our starting deck choice, we want a deck that can win fast and also farm DP, and that means we're going to start with the Spellcaster deck. The main reason is that there's a lot of 1900 beat sticks, which are really good against the early opponents, and it also gives us a pretty solid base to build it in a way that will naturally give us the certain duel rewards, no special summoning, no playing trap cards, and only winning with battle damage, which will basically double our score in some instances. But before we get into any of the farming stuff, we first need to buy some packs. And you might have noticed that the Spellcaster structure and the True Starter deck both don't contain a Pot of Greed, which is great because thanks to the work of community member GMS, Pot of Greed is limited to 3 in this game with the use of the banlist code exploit. That's going to give us a really unique opportunity to capitalize on our day 1 packs by resetting Legend of Blue Eyes pools until we get 3 Pot of Greeds, and that shouldn't take too long because it's only a rare in this set. These are going to make our day 1 deck considerably more consistent, and it's going to save us money on any deck that we make in the future. So with all those things in mind, our day 1 deck is going to look something like this. We are going to leave in a couple cards like Chaos Sorcerer and Sakuretsu Armor, just because they might win us a duel and we don't have too many good day 1 options, but you should really hold on to them if you don't need to use them. And now that we can start grinding wins, we're going to pick on a very weak duelist so we can win much faster. And our target is going to be Battery Man in level 2. You can unlock this duelist by beating all the tier 1 duelists once, so it's not going to take long, and he'll carry an extra 50 DP bonus because he's level 2 on top of being notoriously weak. As you can see from the deck list, there isn't much defensive traps or defensive effects at all in this deck. It also really doesn't help that the AI likes to summon the Battery Men in attack mode and often will just limit to removal their board for no reason, so those things make this a pretty easy target. But go ahead and get used to this deck list, because we only need 100 wins in campaign mode, but we need 200 wins to unlock everything in challenge mode. So that means we're going to beat Battery Man 100 times before moving on. But now that you've unlocked him, you've won 5 duels and have a little bit more money to play with. So now we're going to talk about what we're going to build from here on out. Our best option is to go with a budget version of the last turn farm deck. We're going to want to target Labyrinth of Nightmare for Jowgen and Jar of Greed, but it also contains strong 4-star monsters and equip spells, which can make our deck a little bit better in the meantime. We're going to want to buy more packs every 5 to 10 wins until we get 2 of both Jowgen and Jar of Greed, and then buy the last 1 or 2 from the password machine if you're feeling unlucky. From there, we're going to start buying Pharaonic Guardian for a Cat of Ill Omen, Jowls of Dark Demise, and Non-Aggression Area. These are all commons in this set, and we're going to want 3 of each for our budget build. From there, we're going to move on to Last Turn from Legacy of Darkness, which is only a rare, and we can buy 26 packs for the same price it would cost to get it from the password machine, so it's definitely worth trying to pull them. And the last part of our deck for the farm is Wall of Revealing Light. These are actually really cheap from the password machine, but are a super rare in a pretty expensive set, so that's really good for us. And that should only give us 10,000 DP left until we're ready to start budget farming. Now I know it looks bad, And it might take a couple of resets to get a quick kill, but at over 2000 DP per win, we're going at least 3 to 4 times faster than we were in terms of DP farming than we were. And it only took me around 40 wins to get this list put together, but I can see it taking up to 60 if you get like really bad luck. But once you're here, you can improve your deck really fast with Drag Down into the Grave and Corpse of Yatagarasu for some of the weaker cards, and by then, your duel times should drastically be decreasing because this is the fastest winning deck in the game. Mostly because we don't have to watch a long Exodia animation, we don't have to pad our graveyard or sometimes remove our opponent's card for reversal of grades, and we don't have to be going second in terms of like a Cyberstein OTK. In fact, this is the quickest campaign grinding deck in the game, with the world record holder Raja optimizing the list to get a whopping 27 duelists in 33 minutes. This is going to be the deck list we're targeting, and it's going to take a little bit, but it's going to be very much worth it. The last parts of the deck are going to be very expensive, and I recommend getting Graceful Charities from the Password Machine before buying a bunch of Spell Ruler packs for the upstarts and the painful choices, and then once you have 3 upstarts, I would get the rest of the painfuls you need from the Password Machine and get a couple feathers from the Password Machine too. That will give you pretty much a fully complete last farm deck, and it's going to get you a ton of money throughout the rest of the campaign. All that's left to do now is finish out your wins on Battery Man and beat everyone else 5 times so that you make it to that 200 win threshold. Once you do that, you're ready to move on from campaign mode and begin the challenge modes. And I recommend starting out with survival mode. This is the gauntlet style mode where your life points carry over from duel to duel without resetting to 8,000 like it normally would. This is going to require a very different deck building approach where we need to incorporate life gain cards while avoiding cards like Dimension Fusion and Solemn Judgment. For this mode, one of the best high mileage cards is the Fairy Equip Cestus of Dagla. This combined with Air Knight Parshath is extremely strong, and alongside we're sporting a small package of fairies which can gain us a ton of life whenever they are able to attack directly. This is a pretty straightforward aggro deck, and the most important thing to remember in this mode is that you want to pad your life points enough so that you can get a little bit unlucky. At some point, you're just going to get a garbage starting hand, and you're going to draw nothing off the top of the deck, and that's mostly where you're able to lose runs whenever your opponent just runs away with the board position. So in most cases, you're going to want to build up around 40,000 life points, which will give you a few turns to draw something off the top of your deck. Once you get to this life total, you can start playing aggressive again and just build it up in case anything bad happens. And yeah, this shouldn't be too bad to complete. Most of the duelists are an easy layup, but you do want to be prepared in case you run into like Skull Servant and they have like a stall card, or if you run into Exod and they have some big defensive walls, you just want to be prepared for everything. Now, we don't necessarily need more money, but since we can do the duel puzzles whenever, we might as well do it now in order to give us as much money as possible in order to build decks for the limited and theme duels, because they're going to be a lot and they're going to be pretty expensive, so we want all the resources we can. This won't take you too long, especially if you have the solutions already on hand, and if you prefer a video guide over a written guide, then I'd recommend Raja's World Record playlist, which I didn't even know this, but there's actually a leaderboard on retro achievements, and Raja's really advanced the metagame around Ultimate Masters recently, so this is definitely worth a watch if you're interested in that sort of thing. Now that we've got all those done and got some extra DP in the process, It begins the very long deck building and preparation for all the limited and themed duels. These will require vastly different limits to be able to duel or objectives to complete before we can win. Also, another thing to note is that you have to complete some duels of one type in order to unlock some in the other category, which will kind of throw off the flow of our grinding and require us to update or switch decks in the middle of it. For this reason, we want to go over all the decks up front and know what we're looking for when we're buying cards, and most importantly, make the least amount of decks possible to complete all the challenges. With that in mind, let's look at all the decks we're going to use for the limited duels first. So let's begin with a list of all the limited duels and then group them based on which deck we're going to use to complete them. If you've seen my other video, then you know that Monsterless Burn is going to be by far our most used deck in the limited duels section. Really, any Monsterless deck will knock out a large portion of these right away, and now that we have no ban list, this burn deck is just insanely nasty against the computer. Triple Ring of Destruction, Triple Magic Cylinder, and Triple Dimension Wall are just way too strong, and backed up by playsets of Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, make it very easy to burn the opponent out within a couple of turns. Really, the only thing that can slow this deck down is your opponent getting a bad hand and not playing any monsters, which can leave you waiting for a few turns, but this is probably the fastest way to get through this mode by far, and we're even going to need a burn deck later as a base that we're going to modify for a theme duel, and we're going to get some utility out of it there too. Now from our shortened list of challenges, we can see that a lot of them are banlist style. And this one will only check the one that we're using, and thanks to the help of the exploit, we can do this with any deck, which is pretty cool, but for the rest of them, we don't have that option and have to do it by the book. And we could keep track of each one and construct different decks for them, but I decided to use a deck that automatically passes every banlist duel in the form of Monarch Control. Basically, all the good cards, including the Monarchs themselves, never get touched. I mean, Brain Control, Soul Exchange, Treeborn Frog, Spirit Reaper, Cyber Dragon are just naturally at 3 for the whole game, and that just makes this deck pretty consistent and pretty broken. But really, Treeborn Frog is the true broken part of the deck and allows us to constantly fire off Monarchs, even if they get Mirror Force, Torrential, or Regeki or anything like that. But don't get me wrong, these are some of the strongest opponents in the game, and they run cards like Delinquent Duo and Blackluster Soldier, and can be pretty devastating in the right spot. So now that we've got those out of the way, there's not too many left, and in fact, there's 3 of these that we can do simply by modifying the decks we already have. The first one is the Spells Forbidden challenge, which we can just take out all the spells in our Monsterless burn deck, and then add in like Desk Koalas and Cyber Jars to make it really good, which will help us get through that challenge. We can also bring in our day 1 farm deck and just beef it up a little bit in order to use it in the Sets Forbidden challenge. And this one's a little tricky because you're not allowed to have sets, and if you try to set a card during the duel, then you'll instantly lose the game. So from personal experience, I just know that it's really hard and frustrating when you're trying to have sets and you're not able to complete the duel. So this one's a little bit tricky. Go ahead and watch out for it, but not too bad once you get it over with. And yeah, once you finish that one, you can also knock out the Traps Forbidden challenge. So go ahead and do those 2 at the same time. And that's only going to leave us with these select 4. And these will actually give us a really interesting opportunity in order to use one deck to sort of get through all of them. We're first going to start with a 40 card monster deck, which is required for the Monsters Only challenge. Great challenge, by the way, Konami. And we're just going to start with that and just put a bunch of Chaos monsters in with a bunch of Light and Dark Searchers. And once we do that duel, we can actually just put in 40 more spells and traps in order to give us a perfect ratio, and we can use that deck in order to knock out both the 60 and the 80 card deck. And since we have this super big deck kind of lined up already, we can just take out the multiples, which will allow us to get to the singleton deck challenge with a pretty good chaos deck intact. So I don't really know what to call this one. We'll just call it Chaos Monsters Thick in single. So those are the limited duels, and we only have a handful of decks that we need to keep track of, and for the most part they're pretty cheap to assemble. Nothing's too crazy expensive, but going into the theme duels is just a completely different game. In this section we need to do things like summon Victory Dragon and get the winning kill with it. We need to summon a perfectly ultimate Great Moth. We need to do things like discard 20 times from the opponent's hand. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. So for this mode, we're going to have to pull out all the stops. Now the best deck to use for the theme duels is a Makyura FTK deck. It may not look like it, but this deck has the potential to be able to complete some of the hardest challenges in the game on the first turn. As you can see from the base, the deck is relatively simple. It just wants to put a Makyura into the graveyard from the deck or the hand, and then you'll be able to chain all of the draw cards together to be able to find the win condition, which in this case is Reversal of Graves. And this card will allow you to deck your opponent out before they get their very first draw phase. And this deck's so strong that you end up with a ton of resources at the end of the game, which gives us an opportunity to do cool stuff before we win the duel. So let's take the Gate Guardian challenge for example. All we need is 3 parts in the graveyard, which is very easy to do with Painful Choice and Foolish Burial. And simply by assembling 4 cards in our hand, we can summon Gate Guardian while also winning the duel on the first turn. This really isn't that hard for this deck to do at all, and it's going to make a lot of these challenges much more easier. And by getting a little creative, we're going to be able to knock out some of these other ones like the Union one and the Flip Effect one within a couple of turns and pretty reliably, but the combinations can be a little bit tricky, so I'm going to post a little bit more information in the description and also be on the lookout for a deck profile that I'll be doing on this deck later. Now the other best deck to use for this mode is a Jar Tribal deck. This base was designed specifically for the fusion and ritual duels because they're some of the hardest challenges in the game. Mostly because it's very easy to run out of resources before completing the objective, so the way we solve this is by running 3 copies of Fiber Jar. These are a fantastic alternative to having to run a bunch of recycle effects or something like a bunch of fusion materials and polymerization type cards. Instead, we have a much more streamlined deck that can reset the game at any moment and will be much more forgiving during these longer resources based challenges. And this deck will even help in a ton of other challenges too, because of the specific jar effects, like Cyber Jar will speed up the Monster Destruction effect challenge, Morphing Jar and Card Destruction will allow us to discard a ton of cards from the hand, and even Fiber Jar can help us on the Return Monsters with Effect challenges. So this is a very interesting deck, and you can either win through steady damage in between Fiber Jars, or you can slowly remove your opponent's cards until you're easily able to string together draw effects that will deck them out. So yeah, these duels are just going to be long and grindy regardless. I know many of you have sat through some of these and it's just not fun, so I would highly recommend this deck if you're going to go that route. So now that we've got our list cleaned up, you can see that those 2 decks do a bulk of the heavy lifting in this category. And we can even bring in 3 of our other decks from before to save us some deck building time too. Monsterless burn is pretty quick and can easily win in 5 turns. It can win on the opponent's turn. It can also end the game in a draw with a properly timed Ring of Destruction. And lastly, with a solid enough hand, you can get a 5-chain combo going. We pretty much just need any run-of-the-mill beatdown deck in order to defeat 20 monsters, and we can even beef it up a little bit by using things like Ojama Trio, Mask of Darkness, and Tsukuyomi. We can also use the Bandless style deck, the Monarch deck, because it has so many tributes, and we can easily just tribute summon, tribute summon, tribute summon. Again, there's over 15, so it's pretty easy to get 10 summons with that. So after all those, we've got only 2 challenges left, and they're both pretty weird. Deflected damage is the challenge where you have your opponent attack into your face down monsters, and the damage that they take from that is what they call deflected damage. And you need to do 4,000 damage this way and then win the duel. This is a little awkward because once they attack into a face down monster, they know what it is and they're not going to attack into it. So unless they play a Berserk Gorilla and you get a little lucky with that, we're pretty much going for a Fairy Box Turbo deck. We're just going to pad a ton of monsters that have a high defense, get some fairy boxes, and pretty much pray and wait for your opponent to do something. So this challenge isn't too bad. I mean, having your opponent's cooperation is a little weird, but Fairy Box is probably the most consistently fast way to get through this challenge. However, the last challenge is quite a bit of a doozy. This is the Special Summon Seed Challenge. This has you special summon monsters 10 times by removing monsters from play. This one's definitely going to take a little bit and require us to make a very specific deck in order to get it done. It's going to take a while to draw through 10 monsters, but once you get one in play and it gets destroyed, it serves as fuel for the next one. So really, once you get it rolling, it's not too bad, and you just need to maintain board control and make sure you don't lose the game while you're farming for these summons. Thankfully, there's not too many weird decks in this mode, and we should be able to get all of this with all the money we've generated over the campaign, over survival mode, and duel puzzles. Plus, as we're completing these, we're going to get more and more money, so if you run out of money, you can always just wait and do them one section at a time. All that's left to do now is buy a bunch of cards, enter a bunch of passwords, build a bunch of decks, and then grind the duels. The most important thing to note is that you want to keep track of the cards you want and you're trying to get from packs so that you don't waste money buying extra cards or having to go back and forth between the trunk. You also want to stay neat and organized on the deck menu, as you're going to be switching around challenges, going back and forth, and modifying decks. And if you have to modify something and you changed it too much, you're going to be pretty annoyed. So you want to stay super neat and clean. And so yeah, that's the quickest way to get through this game from start to finish. And we pretty much get to use all the broken stuff from the early era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which makes it a whole lot of fun. And if you enjoyed this style of playthrough, be sure to let me know, and we can do some other Game Boy Advance games too. Or if you want to see a different game, be sure to let me hear it in the comments. And finally, be on the lookout for some more great Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, as I am chock full of new video ideas for you all to enjoy. But until then, stay clean, scrubs.